The clock struck 10. Moonlight spilled gently across the backyard like someone had poured a bowl of milk over the earth. A soft breeze moved through the ivy, and far away, the faint sound of a church bell echoed through the night. Grace came out holding 2 cups of tea. Ethan was sitting quietly on the porch, staring at the sky, his nightly ritual. Whenever life became too loud, he found peace in the silence of the stars. "What are you looking at so deeply?" she asked with a smile. "The moon," he whispered. "It looks so calm, like everything's right in the world." Grace chuckled. "Do you talk to it too, or just stare?" "Both," Ethan smiled faintly. "Sometimes I talk to it. Sometimes I complain." "Complain? About what?" "Myself," he said softly. "And sometimes, about life." The wind paused for a moment, as if listening. Somewhere far away, a dog barked, and even that sound faded into the quiet night. Ethan lifted his eyes again toward the moon. "I wish life was like the moon," he said slowly. "Sometimes full, sometimes broken, but always there." Grace placed her cup down. "And if the moon disappears?" He took a deep breath. "Then memories remain. The moon can hide, but its light never leaves." He reached out, took her hand, and looked into her eyes. "When you see the moon, Grace, remember me, even if I'm not around." Grace laughed softly. "Where are you going, Ethan? Why do you sound like a poet tonight?" He smiled, that half smile that hides more sorrow than joy. "I don't know," he said. "Maybe my heart knows something it hasn't told me yet." They sat in silence. The moon climbed higher, spreading silver light on their faces. Ethan's eyes shimmered with something unspoken, maybe love, maybe fear. He finally whispered, "When you look at the moon, think of me. It's not just a promise, it's a prayer." He kissed her forehead gently. "The moon will always remind you that I was here. Once." That night, the sky became their witness of a promise made not by words, but by hearts. Neither of them knew that this would be the last cup of tea they'd ever share under the moonlight. Morning came softly, painting the horizon in shades of pale gold. Grace stood by the kitchen window, pouring coffee. Watching the sunlight spill across the floorboards, the world felt peaceful, the kind of peace that arrives right before something changes forever. Ethan walked in, buttoning his shirt, his tie slightly loose, that familiar rush in his steps. "You made coffee?" he asked, his voice still half dreaming. Grace smiled. "Of course. You never start your day without it." He leaned against the counter, sipping slowly, his eyes finding hers. For a second, neither of them spoke. The sunlight caught his face, a soft glow that made him look almost unreal, like a memory that hadn't happened yet. "Don't forget," she said, adjusting his tie. "You promised to be home early today." Ethan smiled. "I never break my promises." But fate, somewhere far above them, had already decided otherwise. The afternoon moved like any other day until the phone rang. A voice on the other end, trembling, hesitant, asked for Grace Miller. Her heart froze before her mind understood. There are silences in life that scream louder than any word. The cup slipped from her hand and shattered across the floor. Time stopped. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed long, sharp, endless. They said there had been an accident on the highway. A truck, rain, a curve too sharp. And a man who had promised someone that he would come home early tonight. That night, the moon rose again, pure and bright, unaware of the storm that had taken place below. Grace sat by the window, wrapped in his old sweater, his scent still clinging to the fabric. The chair beside her was empty, but her mind filled it with his voice, his laughter, his quiet words. She whispered into the silence, "You said the moon would remind me of you." "It does, Ethan, but you never said it would hurt this much." Her tears glimmered like fragments of broken stars. The moonlight touched her face, as if trying to console her, but even the sky felt too far away to help. She looked up, eyes trembling, and said softly, "If the moon could bring you back, I'd never let it set again." Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the echo of a promise made under the same moonlight. A promise that had just begun to live its second life. Not in presence, but in memory. That night, Grace realized something cruel and beautiful. Love doesn't end when someone leaves. It lingers, like the scent of rain on dry earth. Like the last note of a song you can still hear long after it's over. And somewhere above, beneath that same silver moon, Ethan's soul must have smiled, watching her keep the promise. Watching her remember him, every time the sky turned pale and full again. The days passed, but time had lost its meaning. The house, once alive with laughter and the scent of morning coffee, now echoed with silence. Every corner whispered his name, Ethan. The creak of the wooden floor, the hum of the old clock, the faint rustle of curtains in the breeze, everything reminded Grace that love doesn't leave, it lingers. She hadn't touched his things. His books still rested on the shelf, one open at the page he'd never finished reading. His jacket hung by the door, carrying the faint scent of cedar and rain. Sometimes, she'd walk by and close her eyes, just to breathe him in again. It was the closest thing to holding him. Every evening, when the sky began to turn indigo, Grace would walk to the porch and look up the same spot where Ethan once sat, lost in the moon's calm. The world moved on, cars passing, neighbors talking, seasons changing, but Grace's world was paused between two moments. The night of the promise and the day the sky fell silent. That evening, the moon rose slowly pale, shy, and beautiful. Grace wrapped herself in his old blanket and whispered, "You see me, don't you? You're still here, somewhere beyond this light." The wind brushed her hair as if answering her. A gentle hush that felt like Ethan's touch. Sometimes she would talk to him aloud, her voice trembling yet tender. "Do you remember our last cup of tea?" she'd ask softly. "You said you'd always be near. You didn't lie. You're here, in this air, this silence, this moonlight." Tears would come, not as storms anymore, but as soft rain, quiet, almost peaceful. It wasn't grief now. It was devotion, the kind that hurts and heals at the same time. Months passed. Grace started painting again, something she had stopped years ago. But her art had changed. Every canvas she touched carried shades of blue and silver, the colors of the night they last shared. In one painting, the moon hung low over two empty chairs on a porch. In another, a man's silhouette faced the sky, his outline fading into the stars. People praised her work, called it soulful, emotional. But she never told anyone that each stroke was a conversation, each color a memory. One afternoon, as she arranged her paintings by the window, a neighbor knocked. "Grace," she said softly, "you've been quiet lately. You should come over sometime." Grace smiled faintly. "I'm not alone," she replied. "He's here. Every full moon, he comes home." The neighbor smiled politely, not understanding. But Grace wasn't speaking to her. She was speaking to the space beside her, the space that still belonged to Ethan. That night, the moon was full again. Grace sat outside, a cup of tea in her hands, just like old times. The same breeze, the same silence, the same promise floating in the air. She whispered, "I kept my promise. Ethan, every time the moon rises, I remember you." And for a moment, just a moment, she could swear she felt him there. The faint warmth beside her, the quiet rustle of movement, the scent of coffee and rain. The wind shifted, the chimes hanging by the door began to sing. Though there was no storm, no wind strong enough to move them, Grace closed her eyes, her lips curved into a tearful smile. "I know," she murmured. "You never really left." Above her, the moon shone brighter, as if heaven itself was keeping its promise. The morning began softly, the kind that carried the scent of rain and the hush of distant thunder. Grace sat by the window, tracing her finger along the rim of her teacup. Her eyes lost somewhere beyond the pale horizon. The world outside seemed to breathe, slow, gentle, patient, as if waiting for her to take the next breath. the next step. She stood, almost without thought, and walked toward the old wooden rack by the door. Ethan's jacket still hung there, the one he wore the night before he left. She hadn't touched it in months. It had become sacred, like a relic of love, untouched by time, protected by memory. Her fingers trembled as she reached for it. The fabric was soft, familiar, still carrying that faint scent of cedar and rain that made her heart ache in the sweetest way. She pressed it to her chest and closed her eyes. And that's when she felt it, something folded, hidden deep inside the inner pocket. Her breath caught. Slowly, she reached in and pulled out a small, weathered envelope. Her name was written on it, Grace, in Ethan's unmistakable handwriting. The letters curved and tender, like the way he used to whisper her name when the world was quiet. Her heart began to race. For a moment, she couldn't open it. It felt like opening a wound and a miracle at once. Finally, with trembling hands, she tore the seal and unfolded the letter. The paper smelled faintly of him, that mix of ink, cologne, and something human, something eternal. Then she began to read. My dearest Grace, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't keep my promise to stay by your side. At least, not in the way we wished, but I need you to know, love doesn't end where life does. It just changes shape. You always said the moon watched over us. So every time you look at it, know that it's me, the quiet glow you feel on your skin. The stillness that finds your heart when you think you're alone. I'm there. I wanted to leave you something real, something that breathes when you do. So I built something, Grace, behind the oak tree where we first met. Dig beneath the old stone that looks like a heart. You'll find a box. Inside it is a piece of my world, the journal of our days, and the music I never finished writing for you. Finish it for me, will you? Paint it with your colors, your heart. You always had a way of turning silence into beauty. And Grace, promise me you'll keep living. Not half a life of waiting, but a full one of feeling. Laugh again. Love again, if your heart finds someone kind enough to hold it. Don't feel guilty for surviving me. I'll live through every smile that returns to your face. Forever yours, Ethan. Grace's tears fell silently, blurring the ink until the words looked like shadows floating in water. She pressed the letter to her heart, whispering his name over and over, not in despair this time, but in gratitude. Outside, the wind stirred softly, lifting the curtains like gentle hands. It carried the scent of rain, and with it, a whisper, so faint it almost wasn't real. Keep your promise, my love. Grace looked up, her eyes shining through tears, and smiled a fragile, luminous smile that reached all the way to her soul. The moon hadn't risen yet, but she felt its light already inside her, around her, within every heartbeat. That night, she took a small lantern and walked barefoot to the old oak tree behind the house. The grass was cool, the earth damp from the evening dew. She found the heart-shaped stone, just as he'd written, and when she lifted it, her breath broke into a sob. A small wooden box lay beneath, tied with a faded ribbon. Inside was the journal, pages filled with sketches, songs, unfinished letters, and fragments of dreams. And right on top was a small note, written in the corner of a page. Our story doesn't end here. Grace clutched it to her chest, her tears falling freely now. The night sky shimmered above, and for the first time since he'd gone, she didn't feel alone. The night was drenched in silver. Grace sat beneath the old oak tree, her hands trembling as she opened the small wooden box. Inside lay Ethan's journal, its leather cover cracked with time, yet warm to the touch, like something still alive. The faint scent of his handwriting filled the air, mingling with the soft fragrance of wet earth. She brushed her fingers across the first page, tracing the ink as though touching his skin. The first line read, "If I could write music for the moon, it would sound like her laughter." Grace smiled through her tears. She could almost hear his voice, low and tender, humming those words. She turned the pages slowly, each one a fragment of their world, sketches of their home, poems written on napkins, half-finished lines that felt like whispers caught in time. Then she found it. A page filled with notes, a melody written in his delicate hand. Beneath it, in the margin, he had written, "Our song to be finished under the same moon." Her breath caught. She remembered that night, the last one they spent together. Ethan had his guitar resting on his knee, and she had her head on his shoulder. He strummed softly, and the tune had floated into the night like a secret prayer. But he never finished it. Now, sitting under the same moon that had once watched them, Grace lifted the guitar, the one she hadn't touched since he left. It felt heavy at first, like holding his ghost. Then, gently, she began to play. At first, the sound broke, her fingers stiff, her breath uneven. But slowly, as she followed the faded notes on the page, the melody began to breathe again. Each chord carried his memory, his warmth, his laughter. And then, she added something of her own. A new line, soft, trembling, born of grief and hope. The music rose into the night, flowing through the leaves, through the stars, through every moment they had ever lived together. The wind seemed to move in rhythm, carrying the song into the darkness. Tears streamed down her face, but her lips curved into a smile. It was as if he were there again, his hand guiding hers, his voice whispering, "Keep playing, Grace." When the last note faded, silence returned, but it wasn't empty anymore. It was full of him, of her, of everything that still lived between them. Grace closed the journal and held it to her heart. She whispered softly, "I finished it, Ethan. Our song belongs to the moon now." At that moment, the clouds parted. The moon shone down in all its brilliance, painting the world in silver light. The trees' shadows stretched long and gentle, like an embrace reaching out from heaven. Grace tilted her head back, her face bathed in moonlight. "I kept my promise," she said softly. "Now it's your turn to keep yours." And for a fleeting moment, she swore she saw him, standing a few feet away, by the edge of the light, smiling, not as a ghost, not as a dream, but as love itself, endless, untouchable, yet achingly real. Then he was gone, and all that remained was the whisper of the wind through the trees, singing their song over and over again. That night, Grace didn't return home. She stayed under the oak tree until dawn. Watching the stars fade, the sky turn pale, and the first light of morning touched the earth. It felt like a promise kept, like love reborn in silence. And as she rose to her feet, she whispered, "The song never ended, Ethan, it just changed who was singing." The next morning arrived softly, sunlight spilling through the curtains, brushing across the wooden floor like quiet footsteps. Grace hadn't slept. Her eyes were swollen, her heart fragile yet strangely light. For the first time in years, the ache inside her didn't feel hollow. It felt alive, like the echo of something sacred. The journal rested beside her, open to the page where Ethan's music had ended and hers had begun. She ran her fingers over the notes once more, feeling their weight, their warmth, their purpose. A thought began to bloom within her, gentle at first, then clear and strong. This song isn't just ours anymore. She rose from her chair and looked at her reflection in the mirror. Her hair was unkempt, her face pale, but her eyes, they carried something new. A quiet fire, a tenderness that had survived grief and turned into strength. She whispered to her reflection, "If love can live in silence, it can live in song too." That evening, Grace went to the small music studio she and Ethan had built years ago, a room filled with dust and memories. His instruments still stood where he left them, the old piano by the window, the guitar leaning against the wall, the microphone wrapped in silence. She stood in the middle of the room, letting the memories wash over her. Ethan's laughter still seemed to echo faintly between the walls. And for a moment, she felt his presence warm, patient, waiting. "Let's finish this," she whispered. Grace set up the microphone, her hands trembling as she opened the journal once more. Then, Taking a deep breath, she began to play. The melody flowed gently at first, hesitant like a fragile bird learning to fly again, but soon it found its rhythm. Her voice rose softly, clear and trembling, carrying Ethan's unfinished tune into the world. Each word she sang felt like a conversation across time, a promise whispered to the sky, a memory turned into music, a farewell that sounded like forever. Her tears fell, but she didn't stop. She sang through them, with them, because they were part of the song too. When the final note faded, there was silence. Not the kind that breaks you, the kind that heals. Grace pressed her hands over her heart and whispered, "We did it, Ethan." Weeks passed. She recorded the song, added Ethan's old recordings, and blended their voices, his from the past, hers from the present. It was hauntingly beautiful, as if two souls were singing together across the veil of time. She named it Under the Same Moon. When she finally released it online, she didn't expect anyone to find it. But love, true love, has its own way of traveling through the world. The song began to spread. First through whispers, then through hearts. People from different corners of the world listened and wept, saying it reminded them of someone they had lost, someone they still loved. The melody carried something universal, grief and beauty intertwined, sorrow and light dancing in one breath. Grace read the comments through tears. "This song feels like my husband still speaks to me. It sounds like love found its way back home." Whoever wrote this must have known the moon, and in that moment, she understood Ethan's promise had never died. It had simply changed its voice. That night, Grace walked outside again. The moon hung high, calm, eternal, glowing with the same silver tenderness it always had. She looked up and smiled softly. "The world can hear you now, my love," she whispered, "and they'll remember you every time the moonlight touches their skin." The wind stirred gently, as if in reply. And somewhere deep in her heart, Grace heard his voice again, not from memory, not from pain, but from peace. "You kept your promise, Grace, and so did I." The song traveled farther than Grace had ever imagined. It wasn't just her voice, or Ethan's melody anymore. It had become a vessel carrying memories, longings, and unspoken love to places she would never see, from small towns to bustling cities, from quiet bedrooms to crowded cafes. Under the Same Moon wove its gentle magic. Every night, Grace would sit by the window, staring at the silver moon, imagining that Ethan's presence was reflected in the eyes of everyone who listened. She had released the song, but it had taken on a life of its own, like moonlight spilling over oceans, touching souls she had never met. And then, one evening, something extraordinary happened. Grace received an email from a young musician named Lucas Bennett. From a distant city, he wrote with trembling honesty, "Your song, it changed my life. I lost my wife last year, and I never thought I'd feel her presence again. But when I listened to Under the Same Moon, I felt her here, beside me. Please, thank you for keeping love alive." Grace sat in stunned silence. She hadn't imagined that her act of devotion, finishing Ethan's song, sending their love into the world, could reach someone else so deeply. And yet, here it was, a heart speaking across the invisible threads of sorrow and hope. For days, Grace and Lucas exchanged letters. Not just ordinary letters, but letters filled with memories, reflections, and stories of loss and healing. Each message felt like a conversation across the moonlit sky. Two souls finding understanding in their shared grief. One evening, Lucas wrote, "Grace, your song has taught me something I never knew. That love never dies. It changes shape, and sometimes it finds new forms, new hearts. I want to meet you, to thank you, to feel this magic together." Grace's heart leaped, not with fear, but with the strange, tender thrill of hope. She realized then that love was not a chain that kept her tied to the past, but a river flowing, endless, and capable of finding new paths. The day they met was quiet, almost ordinary, yet extraordinary in every way. The cafe was small, its windows glowing with the warm light of late afternoon. Grace arrived first, clutching Ethan's journal to her chest, her steps unsteady yet purposeful. Lucas entered moments later. His eyes met hers immediately, soft and honest, carrying the weight of someone who had walked through grief and returned, changed. No words were needed at first, only the unspoken understanding that sometimes hearts connect across lifetimes, across loss, across the delicate moonlight of memory. They sat together, talking softly, sharing stories of Ethan, of the song, of the nights spent under the moon. Grace realized something remarkable, that her love for Ethan had not diminished her capacity to feel. It had expanded it. Now, her heart had room not only for the echoes of the past, but also for new beginnings. As the sun dipped and the first slivers of moonlight touched the table, Grace whispered to herself, "Love finds its way, always." And for the first time in years, she felt a lightness that had nothing to do with forgetting. It had everything to do with living, with keeping the promise she and Ethan had made beneath the same eternal moon. Years had passed, yet the moon had never forgotten them. Every full moon, Grace would find herself on the porch, sitting quietly with a cup of tea in her hands. Just as she had on the night Ethan had whispered his promise, the world moved around her, spinning faster with each passing day. Yet she remained anchored not by sorrow, but by devotion, by love that had survived the harshest of silences. The song, Under the Same Moon, had become a quiet phenomenon. People wrote to her from every corner of the world, sharing stories of love, loss, hope, and healing. The music had become more than a tribute to Ethan. It had become a beacon for hearts that needed to feel that love could endure, that grief could transform into beauty, and that promises made beneath the moon could never truly fade. And yet, it was not just the world that reminded Grace of him. It was in the small, intimate moments, the way the wind brushed her hair, the rustle of leaves against the window, the faint scent of rain and cedar in the air. It was in every quiet heartbeat, every sigh, every tremor of memory. One night, as the moon hung heavy and silver above her, Grace felt a familiar warmth beside her. Lucas sat quietly, his presence gentle, respectful. A new chapter woven into the story she had carried for so long. He understood the unspoken promise she had kept, the love that had shaped her soul. And yet he brought with him a lightness, a possibility, a life beyond grief. Grace smiled, letting the music of the night wrap around her. "Ethan taught me how to love," she whispered, "and now, life is teaching me how to keep living." Lucas reached for her hand. "And you're doing it beautifully," he said. "The song, your story, it's eternal." The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the faintest echo of a guitar, a soft note of a melody once unfinished, now complete. Grace closed her eyes and felt Ethan's presence, not as a ghost, not as a shadow, but as love itself, infinite, untouchable, yet alive in every fiber of her being. She realized then that life was a tapestry of beginnings and endings, woven together by the threads of love. And though Ethan's hand no longer held hers in the living world, his soul had never left. Every moonlit night, every note of the song, every gentle breath of wind, they were reminders that love could never die. That night, Grace wrote in Ethan's journal, now hers to keep. "We promised under the moon. I kept my word. You live in me, in every heartbeat, in every song, in every silver glow. And I will carry you always, endlessly, beautifully." The moon reflected off the quiet pond behind the house, casting silver light across the garden. Grace and Lucas sat together, their hands intertwined, hearts open to the promise of now and the eternity of memory. And in that moonlight, Grace finally understood the truth Ethan had left her. Love does not end. It transforms. It lingers in whispers, in music, in the quiet spaces between heartbeats. It lives in memory, in devotion, in life itself. The night stretched on, calm and infinite, and the moon smiled down as if to say, "Love, once promised, lasts forever. Grace looked up, her eyes glistening, and whispered softly to the silver sky, "Ethan, I'll see you every time the moon rises." And the wind carried her words into the night, where love eternal, tender, and unbroken waited quietly beneath the same silver glow.